Panther Point Lake, Swan Lake, shoreline all the way down from Cottonwood Bayou all the way back up to here, down to Cedar, Twin, all this area back up in here. We've had some fluctuating tides and stuff. We've had some super low tides over the last several days. So that's something that you have to take in consideration depending on where you're going to fish and what you're going to do and how you're going to approach your day as far as your game plan goes. Again, make sure that you always have a game plan in place no matter what's going on, so you have an initial thing that you're going to do is how you're going to fish that day, and then you can deviate off that if that what you have to do. But when you get these super low tides that take place like this and drops that water way out of there, you got to make sure that you're in areas where you can operate safely, because most of the time when that water's super skinny like it is, those fish will pull off of those flats like that, pull out of some of those back lakes, and they'll get off in a little bit deeper edges, deeper bowls, deeper cuts, especially if they're close to or adjacent to some of the areas that you're wanting to fish. So that's always something that you want to keep in mind when you know that you got these type of tides. Now, all back in here, man, you've got tons of little back lake areas that are here off the main cut that comes off of San Antonio Bay back into these areas here. All this stuff back in here is super wadeable, very easy to wade. You got a little squishiness here and there. But again, our tides have dictated that it makes it a little bit more difficult to fish, or enough water has dropped out that you can leave your boat outside and you can walk into it. Both scenarios come into play over the last week. So something to take into account. All these areas back in here with all the mangroves. We've been, our primary baits that we've been working, the two baits that's been really good for us has been the new flavors from both companies, of both in the Knock and Tail and the Down South lures. Big Papa Pearl from Down South and the Rogue flavor from Knock and Tail. Both of those flavors have been very productive for us. Lots of great reaction to those fish. Are eating them up. So if you haven't gotten some of those, again, the fishing show ended this week, so that is something you get to your local tackle store or online, either one, that you can get a hold of those things. If you don't have those already in your box, make sure that you get you a few packages of those, because they're very productive baits for you. You would do yourself an injustice not being able to fish with those. So again, 16th ounce jig heads, still throwing those, and that's primarily what we're going to throw throughout the spring. May adjust to an eighth later as we get into summertime, but time will tell what we do with that. Right now, we're still throwing the 16th ounce. Again, in the Down South, in the Big Papa Pearl. And this both in the original size and the burner. Burner's been very productive in that size. Again, we are right here on the cusp of full moon, so another day, and we'll probably be right at 98% to 100%. So you've got, the next 5 to 6 days. Your morning feeds, or your morning time with the moonset minor, will be in play. Will be a pretty productive time frame for you to fish some of these areas, or whatever area that you're wanting to fish. Put that into your fishing day to start your day out. Middle of the day bite will be somewhat difficult, as you have a moon over major, in those time frames during a full moon are the most difficult to fish. Can you catch fish during those time frames? Yes, you can. It's not that easy. Fish are just not really wanting to feed too terribly much. You pick you one up here and scratching them out here, but your moon set in the morning and your moon rise in the afternoon will be your two primary time frames in which you're going to want to fish, or have an opportunity to fish during those time frames. That'll be your most productive time frame. Evening time on a full moon typically has been a little bit more productive than what the moon set is. So you can get there, an hour or so before that moon is going to hit that horizon, or maybe a couple hours before it's going to hit the horizon, and fish it into at least an hour past or 2 hours past when you're above the horizon there. So you're getting into the dark time. You have some really good opportunities to find you some pretty good fish, depending on where you're at and what type of structure. Main thing that we're looking for, again, is going to be grass potholes, mud. Primary still hanging over that kind of stuff. You got some scattered clump shell in some of these areas. That all becomes a factor. Bait has been in lots of places that we have fished this past week. Bait hadn't been an issue. It's just your activity for your fish wanting to eat during time frames, and that's just kind of typical. Again, when you have big moving tides, we have super low tides that happen, and when you have big full moon that's coming up, So you have to be a little bit more patient, work your baits. Another bait that we've been throwing in there has been the Marker 54 jerk shrimp. It's been very productive as well. Either under a popping cork or free line. I like to free line it, especially over like an edge, a little bit deeper drop somewhere. If maybe you've got a bowl that you can throw that thing in there and bounce that off of that shell, or you can bounce it off the mud and grass and that, and you get very good production out of that kind of stuff. So make sure that you've got a little bit of all those particular baits in your box. Top water is starting to light up as well. We've getting in some of these back lakes and that water being dropping out. We're knee, mid thigh, top water. Super Spook Juniors have been good. She Dogs, She Pups have all been good flavors or sizes to throw, and the flavors we've been even throwing white or black and chrome. Any of those are Bone Diamond has been fine as well, but it's been very productive. Fish are reacting to it, and it's a lot of fun to watch those blow-ups happen. So, again, majors and minors that are coming up are going to be very key this week, so make sure that you pay attention to that. Make sure you pay attention to what your water levels are and what they're going to be throughout the process of the day, because that moon setting is going to suck a lot of water out of here. So make sure you're on top of that and look at your weather patterns, locate your bait, and you'll find your fish. Jaybird Point, all the way down into Spalding. These two good little back lakes that are right along this shoreline right here. This one area is called Sherman's. It's probably one of my favorite back lakes to fish. Been in that thing early, throwing some topwaters, throwing down south in there, throwing the knock and tail, Marker 54, the jerk shrimp, all these in these little potholes that are back up in this thing. You can get on the outside shoreline. Our water temps have been pretty consistent now over the last week and a half. It's been hovering starting the day out in that like 70, 71 degrees, and it starts creating or starts moving up and creeping toward 74, 75, depending on how much sunshine's getting on top of it. Last few days, we've had a lot of sunshine, big old high pressure in place. So that water temp has come up considerably. 74 to 78, depending on some of the areas where you're fishing. But on that average temperature, it's been in that 71 to 74, and it's been very comfortable to fish. These fish really are liking that, and it's been making them extremely active during that time frame. So that looking at just your long-range weather plan, that seems to be a trend that's going to continue unless there's something that creeps up on us last minute or just kind of builds. So take that into consideration. Not probably too terribly far away from starting to wet wade. Still got the waders on because it's still just a tad bit cool in the mornings, but when you start getting into and again, it depends on your tolerance level too, what you can deal with or what you want to deal with. Me personally, I like it into that 75 to start the day out with, and it creeps toward 80, so it makes it very easy to wet wade and continue on with that. I'm ready to get out of those waders. But working these mouths, working these back lakes, working in the back lakes, again, throwing top waters, throwing the down souths, the multiple flavors that I've mentioned earlier still apply. Great baits to throw in these areas. You get back in these little back lake mouth areas. When we've had these super low tides, the big old flat that's bat out in front of these back lake mouths has been pretty good. We found redfish over the top of those, been some scattered trout here and there. It's been pretty decent. Nothing great, but solid fish back in these areas here. Again, you can get back in these back lakes and wade those. We've been up in those over the last 2 or 3 days, knee deep to thigh deep water, just kind of depending on what the tides are doing. But they've been, they're dropping out later in the morning throughout the process of the day. So it's always to make sure that you don't get your boat too far back up in there, because it might be sitting on mud if you're not careful. So just keep it in a little bit deeper water. So in case that tide does drop out on you in some of these back lakes, you're still able to get out of it and get away from there. Work all these areas really well. Again, lower tides, these fish want to concentrate into a little bit deeper water. And then when you can find some bait that's stacked up in some of these, it can be a very productive morning or afternoon, depending on when you're going to be fishing these areas. But always pay attention to what that major and minor's doing. Make sure you're paying attention to what the tides are doing there. Look for your bait working in these areas here. Again, water temperature is going to be a key factor in the coming weeks, so make sure that you factor that into the areas that wherever it is that you're fishing, whether it's up in here in the Jaybird and Spalding bite area or wherever it is that you like to fish. That's all part of the factor into the fishing and finding where your fish are going to be located. Swan Lake shoreline, this whole area down through here, these little cut-throughs, little islands, little grass island all the way out here on the tip, right across from Rattlesnake. This little area here, again, the great thing about fishing up in Swan, again, when you got these tides that really drop out on you, we've had, like I said, we've had some pretty super low tides over the last few days. So when you get in some of these areas, it's not fishable, but Swan is one of those that you can still fish it even with a pretty low tide. You can get up on this back shoreline or get just off the edge of that, and it'll draw you back toward the middle where the little bit deeper water is, and those fish will be hanging out in and around that stuff. You're looking in that grass, you're looking for your bait working in these areas here. Main thing that, again, the flavor that I mentioned earlier is Big Papa Pearl by Down South in both the original size and the burner size has been very, very productive for us. Also, the Rogue flavor in the knock and tail lure has been really good as well. Both of those baits have produced, whether it be trout, redfish, an occasional flounder ever so often kicked in there. But those two flavors have been very, very good. So make sure that you get you a package of those or two next time you have an opportunity to get into a local tackle store. But again, working these back edges, working the back lanes here on the back side of these islands. Again, on these back side of these islands, and if you haven't weighted this, super soft back there. Lots of mud, muck, grass, everything that's in it. It's really thick. The silt has built up over years. So if you're going to fish back here, make sure you got a buddy with you, or you stay pretty close to the boat, or tie the boat up to you and just kind of pull it along with you, because it can get really tough back in there. Some of that stuff gets knee to thigh deep if you're not careful. So just take that into consideration. Again, big full moon that's coming. It should be full here the next day or two. And then again, your minors will be your primary time frames in which you're going to want to target your fish, or your fish catching time frame. You know, your moon set and your moon rise, those are going to be your primary target time frame. So look for your fish in areas wherever that is, whatever. If you're going to fish up here in Swan, if you're going to fish Copano, certain areas, wherever you like to fish, those are going to be time frames that you really want to make sure that you're on. Bait's been working all over these areas here. You get out here on this edge, and you can come down to this shoreline as you head down toward Port Bay. Wade this area, you get lots of great opportunity that's often a little bit deeper water to up to shallower water. It's in these areas here, little cut throughs that come onto these backside of these little islands. They've all had some fish that's been hanging around them. To how much and how many it's varied from day to day or from trip to trip. So biggest thing that you want to make sure that you do is make sure you take your time working these areas. You don't want to rush it. Again, another thing that's been pretty good for us has been the soft dines, just your regular size. Little John XLs have been pretty good as well. Not quite as productive as what the Down South and the knock and tails have been, but we've caught fish on them. So that's just another option for you to have in your box. And again, the one thing that you want to do during a full moon time frame is make sure that you downsize that profile of that bait. You don't want to throw a big old bait out there in front of them, because you may not get that opportunity to catch that fish because they're just not quite as hungry, because most of the time they're not feeding anyway during this time frame. So keep all that kind of stuff in mind. Make sure that you pay attention to what your weather patterns are, because this is one of these little areas there. If you got a little front that pops up out of nowhere, it can kind of put you in a bad situation. So make sure you keep an eye on what your weather pattern and your wind patterns are doing. Pay attention to what your wind phase and all that kind of stuff is taking place. Continue to look for your bait in these areas. That's the primary source. Is once you find your bait, you'll find your fish hanging in these areas.